Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Just want to start off by saying thank you for taking the time to complete this class. Whether you are a new member and just joining us, or if you've been around for a few years, I appreciate you guys taking the time to go over this orientation class. Hopefully by the end of this course, you should be able to say that you can successfully describe the history of the MRC. You can see some of those benefits that we provide here in the community, and you'll know the levels of participation that we have here available within our units, as well as go over some training requirements. And hopefully by the end of this, you guys will understand our deployment cycle and how we activate, deploy, and demobilize all of our volunteers. And then as well as summarize some of those liability protections, just so you are familiar with what is there and in place to make sure that you are protected when you're out on deployments with us. And we'll just kind of go over all of those things. Hopefully by the end of this course, you can say that you understand all of those. So just to start off, here's a brief timeline of the MRC. The MRC was created shortly after 9/11. It was in response to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So we just recently had our 20-year anniversary, and there's a lot of growth that has happened over those 20 years. Here you can kind of see some of the things and how things have developed and how we've grown, and different approaches that have created, or that we've created based off of events. So like I mentioned, we were created shortly after 9/11. In addition to the MRC, you found there were a few other corps that were created out of this USA Freedom Corps. So some of those other corps include the CERT, so Community Emergency Response Teams. This is definitely a great program that you can also get involved in addition to the MRC. Some other ones that kind of come and go, so you have VIPS and Neighborhood Watch and Fire Corps as well. All came out of that USA Freedom Corps. Alright, so here locally, what our purpose and reason and mission behind having our units is to be able to recruit and train volunteers who are focused on strengthening public health, reducing vulnerabilities, building resilience, and improving preparedness, response, and recovery capabilities. That is the whole reason that we have this unit, and that's what we are striving to do. So hopefully by the end of this course you can understand a little more of how we strive to reach those mission goals and kind of what we're trying to do to make this happen. So there's a couple different benefits that the MRC can provide to local communities. One of the biggest things is strengthening public health. As the volunteer side of the Bear River Health Department, we are fairly closely entwined with their responses, their events and such. And so definitely we are there to support public health and there to try and make sure that public health has the resources necessary to accomplish their missions. Additional benefits include the improvement of emergency response capabilities and building community resilience. Another goal of the MRC is to be part of our community emergency management community and being a support there as well, so that way we can have better response and be able to come back after a disaster quicker. So one of the main things and one of the main goals of the MRC is to help in a surge event. So if there's a major natural disaster or man-made disaster potentially, and you have a lot of individuals who are injured or sick potentially, that can overwhelm the healthcare system. The goal is to have those MRC members who are pre-trained, pre-credentialed, ready to go, and so that they can respond and help support the regular healthcare infrastructure to help make sure that that additional patient surge can be handled. So we are an additional unit, an additional resource to community health activities. So health screenings, health fairs, we can assist with those in a day-to-day type of situation. In an emergency, we are an additional resource to help fill those health gaps that may start occurring after a disaster with loss of typical infrastructure. And so again, just main goal of us is to have pre-trained, pre-credentialed volunteers who are already ready to go and ready to respond in disaster. And then again, just hopefully the goal is to have fewer untrained, spontaneous volunteers showing up on a disaster day, ready to help, wanting to help, but we're going to have to take some time to get them rolling. The goal and benefits of having a strong MRC unit is to have those members already ready to go so that they can quickly respond and start hitting the ground running. So there's a lot of different things that our volunteers could potentially participate in. Some of these events and activities are already in place and things that we do now. Others are things that we are trying to build and add into our capabilities. So some of the main ones that we do are mass dispensing efforts. So that would be like our flu clinic. So typically in the fall when we have big events like that, so mass dispensing efforts and vaccination clinics very hand in hand quite often. Other ones that I'm sure you guys have been seeing are the health screenings. This is something that we're just kind of starting to include, and so we've had a pretty good interest with our community health workers and our health educators wanting to provide the blood pressure screenings at health events that they're going to. Other event or activities that we already have going are community event support, so sending out our first aid support to different bike rides, races, fairs and such. So there are some things already in place. And then these other ones are things that we are trying to build and add to and develop those capabilities as well. So with our MRC, we cover Cache, Rich, and Box Elder counties. So there's a potential that events can come up in all three of those counties. You can assist with whichever counties you're willing to respond to, and always across the board, any request that we send out for volunteers is always up to the volunteer to participate and accept. There's not going to be a time where we will ever assign you to a specific response. It is always based on whether you feel that it is a good fit for you or it is something that you are interested and willing to do. So always, like when you see an event, if you see something come up, take that time to review it, see if it is something that you are comfortable with, and go from and decide to respond from there. So some of the requirements here, you can just kind of see the list of different things that we do ask of each of our volunteers. With that criminal background check, that is something that we'll talk about later in that tier program. This is something that doesn't have to be done today, but as you're working through the tier program, that is something that we do ask our volunteers to complete. And you'll just work through me and do it here at the health department, and we can get that done fairly easily. But please make sure you review this requirement list and make sure that you are good with all of those pieces. I do like to point out this in good health both physically and mentally. We want to make sure that you are in a space where you can respond, not just physically, but also mentally, making sure that you have that capacity right now to help in sometimes very stressful situations. So always take that time to do a check-in before you accept a response, specifically before you accept a response, to make sure that you are physically and mentally ready to take on whatever event may be asked at that time. A couple of things that will disqualify you from volunteering. So if you are falsifying any information on your application or your profile on Utah Responds, if you fail to adhere to our volunteer code of conduct, which is something you will we'll talk about further later, and you can see in your member handbook. If you ever self-deploy to any instant, that is grounds for disqualification. Anytime you go out to a disaster, out to a scene, always make sure that you have been properly assigned, deployed to that scene. Never ever show up on site without receiving specific instructions. Also, failure to adhere to chain of command. So if you are out on a site and you begin doing things on your own accord, you're not listening to your supervisor, the person who you're supposed to be reporting to, that is another grounds for disqualification. Any inappropriate behavior, so again, not adhering to that code of conduct, and potentially failure to pass a criminal background check would disqualify you from volunteering as well. So a couple of things that we do ask of our volunteers and things that we want you to consider so that way you can be a successful volunteer are your family and work obligations. So I do want you to take some time to think about your current life situation. And do you have the ability to help out in a disaster? Is your family prepared to take care of themselves in a disaster if you were asked to deploy during the disaster? So we do strongly encourage all of our volunteers to take that time to develop personal and family emergency preparedness plans, so that way they're more likely to be able to say yes, that they feel their family is prepared, they are prepared, and they could function while you came on a deployment potentially. And again, be aware of your limitations, both physically and mentally. All assignments are up to your discretion to accept or reject. It is not something we assign, so always take the time to consider these three things when you receive a request for help or when there's the deployment sent out. Always consider these three things before you say yes to any assignment. All right, a couple of expectations that we have of the volunteers. If you are a medical personnel type of person and you have those professional licensures or certifications, please maintain those and keep that current in your profile. If you choose to let that go, no worries, just update that in your account so that way we make sure that we are deploying our volunteers within their scope of practice. So kind of along those same lines, we do ask that you keep that Utah Response profile as current as possible. Make sure you keep all that contact information current, licensures, training, certifications. If you make sure that that is as current as possible, that is really beneficial to making sure that we have volunteers who can respond and we can actually get a hold of to ask for help. I do ask that you respond in a timely manner to all notifications. So when you see a message, if you could just, even if it is just sending out a newsletter or sending out a training reminder, if you could take that time to just mark as message received, that is awesome. That will definitely help build some memory on how we do deployments if we just kind of go through those steps of always responding to any notification. And then as well as just completing minimum training requirements. Obviously, this is kind of going to vary based on tiers, which we will discuss later, but trying to make sure that you have some of those basic minimum things completed in advance is really beneficial. We do expect you to maintain a high standard of moral and ethical conduct, so following the code of conduct that you'll see in your member handbook, and we'll discuss a little bit more in detail. Specifically, pieces of, or part of that is HIPAA guidelines. We do sometimes work with patients, so you may be receiving some information that is personal health information, so it is protected under HIPAA, and so we do make sure, or we do ask that you make sure you are abiding by all HIPAA guidelines and HIPAA training and following that and protecting that patient confidentiality. And then the last thing is that we do expect you to accept the chain of command, regardless of position. When you come on a deployment, you will receive some information on who you report to. And so it is very, very important that you always follow that chain of command. You report to that supervisor, you take instruction from that supervisor, and you do as you are asked. Try not to go outside of your scope. I do always recommend if you see something, pass it up to your supervisor, but focus on making sure that whatever you are assigned to continues and that you are focused on that job. All right, a couple things that you can expect from working with us. We strive to assign you to roles that will utilize your strengths, utilize your knowledge, your skills, and your abilities. So it really helps for the coordinator side of things, from my end of things, if you are sharing that information with me. If you have a particular skill set, please let me know, just so that way if something comes up that we could utilize that, I already know in advance and can probably reach out to you more rapidly to figure out how we can use those skills or those abilities that you recognize as a strength to yourself. Another great benefit is our training. So we have monthly trainings every fourth Wednesday, and in those we provide different training. It varies. Some of them are on emergency preparedness, so making sure that you have plans in place for yourself and your family. Others would include some like CPR, first aid, triage, stop the bleeds, some really great hands-on types of skills that can help build resume, but also just give you those skills to be able to respond in an emergency and to be able to help take care of your family, your friends, if you were to be in an accident by chance. So it's really just a great opportunity to join in on those trainings. And some of those trainings, like our CPR, you do actually get certification from, and typically that's like a $40 to $50 class, and with coming through us, that is something you can get for free. So it's a really great opportunity to get some of those trainings. Another benefit of working with us is that you have the opportunity to train with local emergency responders. So we do try to get involved with them and give you guys that opportunity to kind of see how the emergency response system works and what role you guys could potentially play in an emergency, and to kind of get to know those other responders, so that way in an emergency we can work together as a cohesive team. And then one final benefit is that you can receive prophylaxis. So like with COVID, we were able to give that vaccine to our volunteers, even though they might not have been in one of the priority groups at that time, because you were working as a healthcare provider, we are able to give you that priority prophylaxis. So definitely a great benefit to our members as you come and assist us. Okay, like I mentioned, training. Definitely a great benefit to you guys. There's a lot of important reasons why we do our training. One of the reasons is to reduce our liability risks, to enhance response capabilities as well. So if we're not training, we increase the chances that mistakes can happen. Sometimes those mistakes can be costly, both financially as well as for personnel. But if we're taking this time to train in advance and develop those response capabilities, we hopefully can decrease that learning curve and get people out the door and ready to go at a faster rate and feel comfortable and confident that they know what they're doing, and hopefully that will help increase that confidence and decrease that stress. So that is really one of the main reasons that we want to do this training, and that we hope volunteers get involved in our training program, is to hopefully just give you that confidence, and so that way you're more likely to enjoy deployments with us. Okay, so as I mentioned, we do have those monthly trainings. So right now we do them fourth Wednesday of each month, except for in December we do skip that training. These locations will rotate between the 3 counties. We typically try to do these in the evening, so that way more people can join us. So most of the time we do start at 6. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of different topics. We vary this, it changes each year, and each year I do want to hear from our volunteers. So I will send out a survey near the end of the year as I'm getting ready to start that new year schedule, asking you let me know if there's anything that you are interested in, if there's a particular topic that you want to learn more about, if there's a particular skill you want to have. Definitely want to have that feedback from you guys so that way we can give you trainings that you are interested in and develop a strong schedule that volunteers actually want to participate with. We do sometimes have additional trainings outside of those Wednesday trainings. Sometimes this could be like a conference coming into town, typically our state summit we have each year, and so those will vary, and I'll just try to send out that information as they come up and become available. In each newsletter that I send out, there will be any updates about trainings, anything that's coming up for trainings or other events will be included in those newsletters. So always keep an eye out for those to receive the most current and up-to-date info. Okay, so the big piece in our training program is this tier system and our tier program. So a big part of this was to ensure that we have some volunteers who are prepared, ready to respond, and that they've already done some of this training and skill practicing in advance, so that way they're more able to rapidly respond to a disaster. So we have it broken up into 4 tiers, and you can work through these tiers at your own pace and can choose which tier you would like to pursue. So you don't have to go for gold. If you want to just kind of take those baby steps and start at bronze, that's awesome. But also, this is not a progressive system. You may already have completed some things in that gold tier and gold level. That's awesome. Really, if you see something that you feel you've already done, we do try to just utilize past training and utilize past experience as well. So I'm not trying to make you guys redo stuff just for the sake of doing it for the MRC. So in like the gold tier, you'll notice that there's licensure verification, background checks, drug tests, onboarding. Some of that onboarding paperwork includes like doing harassment training, some bloodborne pathogen training as well. And I know that's something that a lot of people end up doing, especially if you're in the medical field. You've already done bloodborne pathogen training, and you probably have to do it yearly, just like with harassment training. If you're working, you almost always have to do those yearly. So definitely understand that. If you're doing that, just let me know. We can definitely mark that off and mark it complete. Same kind of idea with background checks. There's a lot of jobs out there that require background checks anyway. If you already have done one, let's talk and see if we can get that information over to check off our box. So if you see anything on any of these requirements for any of the tiers that you think you might have already done, please let us know. Please reach out and we can see what we can check off. And always, general pool, you still get to receive all the same information. It's just more that it's going to take a few more steps to send you out the door in a deployment. Before we send you out, we do need to do a few steps. So if you just aren't quite ready to check off all of these boxes, that's fine. You can remain in our general pool and you will still get that information. And we still strongly encourage that you come to trainings and come to events as much as possible, and we'll just check off some boxes as you go through. Okay, so in our deployment cycle now, let's do it. First, we're going to activate the MRC, and then we'll deploy and then demobilize. So the activation part of this cycle. For non-emergency pre-planned events, you will likely receive a link to a Google Sheet. Most of the time, this will just be sent out on Utah Response, and you can just go ahead, follow that link, and sign up for whatever shift you would like. And urgent activation, you might not see that Google Sheet. You may just receive a message saying, hey, we need help with this general idea. Let me know if you could be available, and you can just respond yes or no. And then with that, you would get some follow-up information actually deploying you to the scene. Do not respond until you have received confirmation from the coordinator that you are being activated and deployed to that scene. In that confirmation, you'll receive the nature of the event, location, and time of your shift, your assignment, if there's anything in particular that you need to be aware of, any qualifications, equipment needs, or anything like that, as well as who your supervisor will be and where to report to. All of that will be included in that confirmation. So again, do not go just because you received this notification of an event and you want to help out. Do not go until you receive confirmation from the MRC coordinator that you are being activated and deployed to that incident. Deployment, again, you'll receive that confirmation from MRC coordinator, and then once you arrive on that scene, always check in. This is something that we ask for safety concerns. We want to know where volunteers are, and we want to know who's at whatever scene. If there is something that happens, we need to have an active roster to know who we need to account for. Again, cannot reiterate this enough, do not self-deploy. Spontaneous volunteers may hinder efforts. If we have too many people showing up on scene, people without assignments, it can bog down the response. So always wait for that confirmation and to report before you go anywhere. And then when you do come to an incident or activation, please make sure you bring some identification. So if you have an MRC badge, please bring that with you. If you don't, and make sure that you do bring your driver's license or some form of identification. And then as well is your t-shirt. So if you have an MRC t-shirt, please bring that with you. If not, we will try to get you the badge or the t-shirt there on scene as well. So after your assignment is completed, you'll go into the demobilization part of this cycle. And so when you have checked it off, your supervisor has said, all right, we're good, you've completed all those activities, you're good to go home. A couple of things that you do want to make sure you do is turn in equipment. So if you were issued anything, radios, vests, backpacks, other medical equipment potentially, make sure you return that to your check-in point, and just make sure it gets back where it belongs. And then attend a debriefing. So some events may actually hold a debriefing there on site or a hot wash potentially. If you can, please make every effort to attend those and share your experience. These hot washes and debriefing sessions can be very valuable learning experiences if people are willing to share what they saw and what they were doing. This definitely can help improvement planning. So please take that time if you can to attend any debriefing that you may hear or see about. Okay. And then check out. So just like when you come in and check in, we need to know who's on scene and where people are. So before you leave any site, always go and check out. Mark yourself as leaving. Again, that is a safety concern and for record keeping purposes. If this is a big disaster, emergency declaration occurs, likely that means we're going to be dealing with some FEMA. And so a big part of FEMA is documentation. So we do need to make sure we keep accurate documentation of hours and what happened, what people were doing, and how much time they spent. Another part of demobilization is interviews. So at the end of your deployment, most of the time you should receive like a Google form from the MRC coordinator. Sometimes these interviews may take place in person, but most of the time we tend to just do Google Forms with these. or potentially if like in person doesn't work, we could do a Google Meet. There's a lot of value that can come from these interviews. This is a place where volunteers can provide direct feedback to the MRC coordinator and let us know how the activation, the deployment, and the demobilization went, help us identify problems, and help us identify areas that were really good, but also areas that could use some improvement. These can be very valuable, again, if people share their experience. So please, if you get those Google Forms, if you get a request to complete an after action interview, please try and make that happen and take that time. All right, so liability protection. Got a couple of different things that are there and in place to protect volunteers when you guys are responding. So here's just a list of things. You have the federal side of things with the Volunteer Protection Act of 1997. Pretty much this all comes down to whether it's federal or state. You can be protected as long as the individual is acting in good faith and reasonably believed they were acting within the scope of their functions and duties, and that any damage or injury was not caused by intentional or knowing act, which could potentially be illegal, willful, or wanton misconduct. If you are doing the best that you can and are not negligent, there are protections in place. So again, if you can just make sure that you're following our code of conduct, you're behaving in a moral and ethical way, those protections should be in place to help protect you while you are out on deployments with us. As I kind of mentioned, those protections do go away if there's willful, criminal, or reckless misconduct, gross negligence, or just flagrant indifference to the rights or safety of others. So again, just make sure that you are following code of conduct and keeping a high standard for yourself. We do also have workers' compensation. So if you are involved in an injury, or if you ever have an injury, if you're involved in any sort of incident or accident while you are out on a deployment with the MRC, please make sure you check in with your supervisor, let them know what happened, and ensure that an incident report is completed and filled out. So that way, if there is any sort of medical care or issues that happen because of that incident, that we have that paperwork completed to ensure that this workers' compensation could help cover. If you have any questions, please reach out. Whether it's about activation or liability, please reach out. Here's my contact information. Just let me know if anything comes up. Okay, so the last piece, the good part here, is this quiz. This is how you get credit for completing this orientation course. Please make sure you take some time to scan this QR code and then complete that quiz. Once you complete that quiz, it will come directly notify the MRC coordinator and let us know that you've completed it, so that way we can mark it down in our training tracker for the tier program. So after you do that quiz, you have checked it off and you should be good to go. If you have any issues with the quiz, again, please reach out to Shelby, that's me, and let me know what I can do to help. Thank you for taking the time. Have a good one.